I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Nnedi Okorafor has written now 22 books. But Death of an Author is really special. It is so good. I love this book. I flew through it the first time I read it, and then I went back and I had to pick up all of the details and all of the characters, and you are going to love this family. But Zelo is well, I should say it's a polyphonic narration, but at the same time, I love her so much. She is the author in question. And Nnedi, thank you so much for making the time for Poured Over. It's really excellent to meet you.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. Very happy to be here.
So can we talk about this book? You've sort of been thinking about this book for 30 years.
Yes. Yes. This is a story that I've wanted to write for a long time. It was a story that was it was the story that I wanted to write. You know, this is what I wanted to write when I first started writing. It's just that I wasn't ready.
Right.
You know, I wasn't ready. For many, just a plethora of reasons. And also I did not have the skill to tell this story back then. This is easily the most personal novel that I've ever written. And when I first started writing, I just couldn't, with my science fiction and fantasy stories, those are very personal for me as well, but it was like I was the director backstage.
Right.
You know, and with this one, it was like getting on stage. It just feels very, very open and very naked. And so like, yeah, I wasn't ready 30 years ago. And it took writing all the books that I've written, because you'll see a lot of themes that I've written previously that coming back. Like it's just everything, all the stuff, like all the stuff in my life, all the stuff in my stories that I've been exploring, all this stuff. I was pulling all of that. And then finally, you know, it was time.
You wrote this relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Especially for you. I mean, I feel like I heard that this book was coming. I got really excited because we sort of knew it was going to be a little different from what you usually do. And, you know, I immediately emailed your publisher and I was like, so can we do this? I am going to be clear, though, that we're going to stay away from spoilers because I've now read the book twice. And the first time just flew through it purely for story, purely for character, purely because I could not stop turning pages. This is a book about a book. We're not really going to talk about the book that's in this book. Well, we're going to talk about it sort of on a high level because I really do want readers to have that experience of novelty and discovery and serendipity. I mean, there's a lot happening in here, but I love Zelu. I love this woman. She is prickly. She is ferocious. She is not having it. And she is all of herself. But she does also use a wheelchair. She's paralyzed. And I'd really like, we don't often meet someone like, in terms of her character, yes, we've seen women not unlike this in your other work, but like she's really her own self. And can we talk about her evolution and how she sort of, because I sort of feel like she was fully formed when you sat down.
Yeah, Zelu is a lot. She's a lot. Yes, she's paraplegic. She's Nigerian American. She is the second oldest child of a large Nigerian family. And she's a lot. And like she's different in many ways. So yeah, she uses a wheelchair to get around. She's paralyzed from a young age, and but she sleeps around a lot. Unabashed. And writing that kind of character for me, who's so different from me, because there are lots of like a lot of people will read this and be like, "Oh yeah, she's Nnedi." No, she's not Nnedi. She's very she has a lot of similarities. Definitely born of my rib. Fine, but she's her own person. So yeah, she sleeps around a lot, unabashedly, and she's very confident in her sexuality. You know, smokes weed, speaks her mind, brash, impulsive, all those things. You know, so she I wouldn't say that she I would say that she came to me fully formed. She and from the beginning of the story, this is not a story about a character who's timid and learns to find her power. This is not that.
No.
This is a character who starts who's already pretty confident and pretty loud and who she is. She comes from this family where she's having to just, you know, exert her importance, her voice but she has a lot of growing to do still, and that's really who she is.
I love this kind of story though, because a coming of age shouldn't be limited to someone in their
Yeah.
in their teens, right, or their early 20s.
Right.
I'm sometimes amazed that I survived my early 20s, but at the
Yeah.
same time, the idea that we can continue to evolve, especially in
Yeah.
the context of a book like this. I mean, part of what sets her off on her, let's call it an adventure for a second, right,
Hmm.
is the fact that she finds huge success writing a novel that she starts when she's actually at a pretty low emotional point in
Yeah.
her career and her life. And I appreciate her family, and I'm clear that her family loves her, but I had some editorial notes on their behavior. And you know what I'm referring to. Like,
It's like,
they're worried about her. I understand all of these things,
yes,
but I'm
they
like, you're
love her.
suffocating her. You're suffocating
Yes.
her.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Yes. Love. It's
Oh,
love. It's all comes from love.
it
Oh, man,
does.
suffocating, you know?
And I get, especially her big sister, who's like, really, it's all about family. There is nothing beyond family. And she's like, well, actually, can we have a moment? And that tension, though, like watching her figure out where Zilu wants to go next, right? Like she's just kind of doing the math and being like, well, do I want to settle down with this person? Do I not want to settle down with this person? You play with tech in this book in a way that I was not expecting. And I know your other, but at the same time, like, self-driving cars become actually very useful
Yes.
for her. And can we talk about your relationship to tech? Because the
Yeah.
piece I'm leaving out. You know the piece of made up tech that I'm leaving out, but we can
Yeah,
we
we'll
can
leave
talk
that.
about self-driving cars for a second here. We can talk about apps. We can talk about the things
Yes.
that make day-to-day life slightly easier.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my, I write science fiction, so
Yep.
there's that. But like on a personal level,
Mm-hmm.
tech, I have like a relationship with technology that that I feel like I just like playing with that. I mean, first of all, like I live with a lot of robots.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a Roomba, I've got a house, one of the Amazon house
Yep.
robots. I live in a smart home. I
Mm-hmm.
love tech. But also one thing that I've come to really start thinking about is the role of technology and disability,
Yeah.
and how those things can how technology can help. Like I'm not I'm there are plenty of stories that are written about all the things that can go wrong,
Yep.
but I'm like, I want to talk about what can go right.
Yeah.
And so one example is the autonomous vehicle.
Yep.
And what like I live in Phoenix, Arizona. We
Mm-hmm.
have Waymo here.
Yep.
And so we've got like I see these self-driving cars on the road all the time. They're
Mm-hmm.
normal to me now, especially. But when I was writing this, I had just tried one of the Waymo cars,
Mm-hmm.
and it was quite an experience. It was quite it was like being driven around by a ghost, you
Uh-huh.
know? And that's not a coincidence that I say that. But one thing I realized when I got in one, I was just thinking about, okay, what is it? Just the idea of how can these vehicles be used how are they useful for people with disabilities
Right.
from that point of view? And you're getting in this car, you don't have to deal with another person, you're by yourself, you're
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, and you're by yourself, and you're not used to that. Like all these things kind of popped into my head where I'm thinking, how are these things useful? And
Right.
so the autonomous vehicle definitely comes from some of my own personal experiences, and I
Mm-hmm.
have my own disabilities, and I know that the type of car that I drive has to have certain mechanisms that are
Uh-huh.
really useful to me in particular because of my disabilities. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, these things aren't being talked about enough. They're not
Right.
being explored enough, and those are those are things that I really wanted to write about, and they definitely came into play with Zelu in many ways that we're not talking about. But
But it's this quest for freedom, right? That I
yes,
think
it
that
is.
really connected for
Yes.
me, and I'm still okay. Verdict is out for me on the self-driving car. It might,
Hmm.
I learned to drive in
Oh, I understand.
Boston.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm not ready to see that kind of, like, it's one thing to be in a
Hmm.
cab or a Lyft or whatever, but I'm not fully prepared for a self-driving vehicle.
Hmm.
But
Understood.
that said, for her and her character and the fact that she's had this wild success and everyone is sort of involved in her life, because again, there's this idea And it partially comes from her family. And yes, they are I want to be clear, they're well-intentioned. We love them. They love
They
her.
love her. Yes.
But they're a little condescending because they're a little freaked out by her wheelchair and the fact that she can't necessarily move around the way everyone in the family does. And they're very overprotective.
Yes.
And I understand the instinct, but man, she's kind of had it with it. She's like, I'm 32 years old. I am not a baby. What is going on here? But I love the idea that she's constantly figuring out what freedom means for her.
Right. Yeah, and she's looking for it as well. You know, she doesn't just kind of curl in on herself and just like, this is my family, this is what they want for me. It feels oppressive, but I'm just going to live in it. She's still looking. She's just still trying to figure it out. And for her, you know, that self-driving vehicle was just it was freedom. Technology in general, like in this story for her, it keeps coming up that it's her way to be free.
Yeah.
You know, technology is our machines, you know, becoming kind of like finding ways where machines can fill in the things that you can't do, and that's freedom. It's an interesting thing to think about.
I have so many apps on my phone. I run my life off of apps. And if someone had said to me 10 years ago that, you know, I would be happily scanning my phone to get on a plane, like what? Yeah. I think sort of the last frontier for me was now using my phone to get onto the subway. I don't even bother with the Metro card anymore. And it's like, oh, wait, this is okay. All right, fine. It's just easier and I don't have to worry about whether or not there's money on my Metro card. And again, it just comes back to what is our relationship to the thing, right? Like, I mean, lots of conversations happening about AI right now.
Right.
And my response is always, well, the AI is only as good as the people who program it. Like, it's not sentient. Like, and you're playing with, there's a subplot where all of this comes in. And I just feel like you're asking lots of questions.
So many questions. I'm like, the book is full of questions. The book is like asking you to ask those questions, to consider those things. It's not here to give you answers. It's there to make you think about these things from this side, or look at it this way. Look around the corner here, because a lot of times the answers are the questions. You know, it's not the answer itself. It's asking the question. And I feel like when it comes to all of these things with technology and like AI, all of that, I feel like there are questions we need to ask. There are things we need to think about and consider and discuss. I think this novel is doing a lot of that. Like, it's kind of like poking you to start these conversations.
Well, and also privacy, right? Like, I feel like this new generation sort of coming up behind you and they're like, privacy? What's privacy? Who cares? And I'm like, how can I turn off all of the things? You know, you can know my location when I'm using your app, but please, you know, all of it's wild.
It is.
That I even think that I can somehow maintain some semblance of privacy in this world when I'm walking around with a supercomputer in my pocket. You know,
that's recording everything and taking all your information. Like, it's like, man, I could have a whole conversation about the role of information harvesting that is going on now that nobody's really thinking about for the convenient. And I'm one of those people. Like, I have a ton of apps on my phone, and I know they're harvesting all of my information and using them for this and that. It's very problematic.
Well, we're the product, right? We're the product, and I think we're seeing the result of this weird binary. I mean, you have this great line from the book within the book, Rusted Robots, where you're saying, well, humans don't really think in a binary. They're very emotional. And I'm like, well, yes. But even Zeo's sister, one of her younger sisters, Amarachi, says this. She's like, well, my sister always felt too much. And that's kind of why she would pull away from us. And we knew she had to sort of, she's kind of insinuating that her sister hid out in books because there was so much going on. And she's like, well, she just felt too much. That's really it. And watching all of the siblings kind of deal with their sister who's like, I have a thing to do. I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to go live my life. And her life gets really big really quickly. And they're not provincial people, but like her sister who's a surgeon is like, well, I'm a surgeon and a mom and my family comes first. And what is wrong with you trying to do all of these things? Can we talk about the family dynamic? Because I love her parents. I love her. I love her siblings. But like, clearly you're juggling so many points of view, all
Yeah.
of which are really legitimate,
Yep.
but also messy.
Yep. Everyone's messy. All of like the whole family, all of them are messy. The fact is it's all built it's all love.
Yeah.
It's all love. It just manifests in various ways. And one of the things that I had to work really hard and I hope I succeeded
Mm-hmm.
is to show his family in all of that messiness,
Yeah.
have the reader still understand this is love. It's not, they're not trying to suffocate her. They're not just
Mm-hmm.
jealous of her and trying to keep her whatever. You know, this is like, and also a lot of it is cultural too, like very interesting manifestation
Mm-hmm.
of cultural, like, and this is why I call it a very Nigerian American
Mm-hmm.
family. So you've got like the Nigerian side, which is very community oriented,
Yeah.
very, you know, the community comes first, the individual comes second, and then you've got the American aspect,
Right.
which is the exact opposite of the individual comes first and the community has to listen to the individual. Like, so you've got like this constant conflict. You've got the parents, you've got the siblings, you've got the hierarchy of
Mm.
siblings, and then all of that, the Nigerian and the American aspects of community and individual. And the hierarchy affects the strength of each of those things.
Right.
So it's like, I know this family well because it's very much like my family. So, like, this is all very, that's why I'm always laughing whenever we talk about the family, because I'm like, this is not something I didn't have to make this part up.
Right.
Like Zelu's family and her conflict and all of that. Didn't have to make that up. But I just hope that I wrote it in such a way where it's honest enough that shows all the sides and all the understanding, and that it's it's very clear that all of it is based on an intense love and concern. Her family's very concerned about Zelu and her safety, and yeah.
So I did not grow up in a Nigerian American family, but I recognize all of
Yep.
that love
Sure. Hmm.
and all of that concern and all of that sort of, is this okay? I mean, there's a universality
Hmm.
to this family that is, I mean, it's funny. And I mean, I have a younger brother, and I mean, you needle your siblings. That's what siblings are for.
Yep.
Like, you fight over whose turn it is to empty the dishwasher, and then you needle each
Right.
other. But you can also say things to a sibling that you don't have to translate. And sometimes it stings a little bit because who wants to hear the truth? But then there are other times where you're like, of course I can hear it when you say it because, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And watching that dynamic and watching how it changes for everyone, it's really entertaining. But there are moments too where, yeah, I just wanted to defend our
Yeah.
gal, and I
Yeah.
would just be a little prickly about it.
Yeah.
But can we talk about the actual writing of this book for a second? Because you are juggling two very distinct storylines. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt as a reader like everything flowed really well. And I will say the ending is so satisfying. You do a thing that is so satisfying.
Thank you.
And I
Thank you.
love it when a book's ending feels organic and not like I needed to get here, so therefore we will write the lines so I can get to this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And instead I was like, oh, yeah, I see how we got here, but also I'm really glad we got here because there was no other place for us to land.
Yeah.
And I assume you're not working sort of linearly through. I mean, it sounds like you might be working on pieces and then the engineering happens, and I'm just wondering if we can spend some time with that.
Yeah, my writing process already in general is very chaotic. I
Okay.
am a pantser. You know, I don't outline.
Okay.
I will not know what I'm writing until I sit down and start writing it. And I don't know what happens next. And I don't write in a linear order as well.
Hmm.
With this book, it was great. This was like the epitome of my weird method
Okay.
because I started writing it, and it was Zelu. It
Hmm.
was Zelu's story, and I've got this character who's writing this novel, that goes on to do all these things. And as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, okay. You can't write a story like this without showing what the novel is. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's so great, you just can't show it. And I remember thinking, I'm like, this is a novel that's about robots, and it's a post-human world. Like, there are no human beings. Like, what kind of novel is that? I don't know. And it scared me. Like, the
Hmm.
idea of writing that scared me. And I have a rule where, like, if something scares me, I know I have to write it. So as soon as
Okay.
that happened, I'm like, ah, God, I gotta do this. So I was like, okay, fine. And I'd written several chapters of Zelu's story before. I was
Uh-huh.
like, okay, let me just try writing a little bit of this. And the minute I started writing, the rusted robots, it was great. I was like,
Okay.
"Oh my God, I love this. I love these characters. It's great. Oh my God, these robots. This is great." It was a straight, I just fell in love with it. So then I was just like writing part of it, and then I'll write this part. So I wrote them like that. And I will say also that after I had finished the book, I have to give credit to the editing process
Hmm.
with my editor, because I'm a pantser. Like, first of
Hmm.
all, always I have a lot of editing in general because of the way that I write. It's
Yeah.
very chaotic, very, so
Okay.
it requires a lot of editing and editing and editing and going over it over and over. So I'd already done that, but then it was like then it was then we had like whole edits where I would look at the placement of every chapter and be like,
Hmm.
okay, well, this needs to be here, this needs to be here. And my editor worked with me on that and pulled a lot more out of me. It was to the
Okay.
point where the editing process was so intense for me at one point where I developed an eye twitch because I was just it was so much, and that eye twitch lasted a whole year. It
Uh-huh.
lasted a
Okay.
year because it was extremely emotional, because this is an emotional novel for me,
Hmm.
and on many levels, but also the the structuring was intense, and moving things around and imagining where things needed to be, and developing that rhythm that the
Hmm.
book has was really intense. So yeah, I mean, the writing of this, it kind of grew on itself. Even getting to the end, I didn't this was one where I didn't know until, like, I had to write myself there, and then it's like,
Hmm.
"Ooh,
Hmm.
ooh, is this what this I did that. Oh, I did that." So it was like that. It was a lot of discovery as I was writing it,
Yeah.
which was really cool.
I felt like there was a lot of joy and a lot of play, and not just because there's stuff that, clearly is made up. I was sort of vibing off the fact that you were clearly having fun writing this, even
Yeah.
though there was a lot of very serious stuff
Yeah.
in here. It's kind of that perfect mix of we got to talk about the big stuff, but I'm going to do it in a way that's so entertaining you won't actually know that we're talking about the big stuff until you get to the end and you exhale. I mean, it was racing through. It was kind of great. It was definitely great. But you can also pull it as two different reading experiences. I mean, the first time I just read
Mhm.
for the sheer exhilaration, right? It was my eyes are getting big just thinking about it. And the second time, again, like there's so much depth of character, there's so much genuine emotion. And actually, Zelu herself comes back to this a couple of times and she's like, well, I knew I'd found the authentic thing. Like she had been writing, and, the book that she'd been writing got rejected a bunch of times. Da, da, da. She starts the book that becomes Rusted Robots, and she shares a writing process with you, it sounds like.
Mhm.
But then she comes to a point where she says, hey, I knew I had this authentic voice. And I want to sit with authenticity for a second with you because obviously world building is very important in what you do.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's distracting if it's not done well.
Mhm. Yes, it is. And boring sometimes.
Yeah, and boring, distracting and boring. But here it's so vibrant and it's so alive and it is so authentic, even though, again, there are details that you and I have chatted about prior to taping that we're not going to talk about here per
Mhm.
se. But when you're doing the world building, I mean, you have to be able to tap into your own sense of what's authentic and what's not. I mean,
Mhm.
yes, you pulled from
Mhm.
your own family, obviously, but this
Mhm.
family is not your family.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, that's what it's like. There's a magical side of world building that,
Hmm.
like, can't explain. It's like, with this book, like with Zelu's world, I was pulling there was a lot already. Like I didn't have to build that world because it's already like I know it well.
Yeah.
It's Hyde Park, Chicago.
Yep.
I was imagining specific places where there's a restaurant. I think it was Yasa's. Yasa's is real. You
Yep.
can go there. I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite restaurants in Chicago. So I already had that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, once I know, like I always know my characters very well.
Right.
Like I know them very well. I knew Zelu very well, her siblings, her parents, like all of them. I knew them very well. So it's like it didn't feel as world buildy for me when I would with Zelu's world. Like because I
Mm-hmm.
knew it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Chicago. The Rusted Robots world, that one, gosh, that one was like that was a new like most of my novels are connected.
Mm-hmm.
There are maybe 3 universes that I write in.
Yep.
The Rusted Robots world is a new one. That was a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was writing it, I was like, "Oh, this is great." And for me, it's like it's not so much world building because I'm not one who sits down and does a chart
Yep.
and is like, okay, this is here and this. I don't need maps.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like for me, it's very like VR. I do VR stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
love it's like the world is around you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like you tap into that VR world and then you just look around. And the story is around you. It's just a matter of looking around and looking under things and looking over here to see what's there. And so like the world of Rusted Robots is very real to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much it's crystal clear to me. And once it's clear to me, writing about it
Mm-hmm.
is so fun. It's really enjoyable.
Is there a chance that you go back to the world of Rusted Robots in a different form?
Yeah.
Okay. That's I just listening to you now, it's like,
Yeah.
there's something cooking.
Yeah, there's something cooking, it's bubbling and broiling because it's like I did not intend it at all. Like I'm like,
Right.
nah, let me just write this, whatever. But it's
Yeah.
too rich. It's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
rich, you know?
Oh, I had a really good time in those chapters. I really like, and I liked the flow between sort
Mhm,
of what I'm going to call the present day
mhm,
Chicago
mhm,
into this novel that is like a superstar hit, like, massive, massive, massive hit in this world. And it does also bring me to Ursula Le Guin. You've written an introduction for a story collection called Five Ways to Forgiveness, but
mhm,
that book also ties to 2 of her other books. And of course, so Left Hand of Darkness and The Dispossessed are
mhm,
siblings to the book that you've written the introduction for. And you pull from a lot of different literary influences, but I want to,
mhm, mhm.
one, you've just written this, and I really like this introduction. There was a lot of
Yeah,
underlining, very
that's
short
I mean,
introduction. So, can I ask you to sort of bring us into how this came about? Because I think your introduction is really charming.
oh yeah, oh thank you. Thank you. First of all, I was honored to even be asked to write it because that's what they had asked me to write the introduction, and I was like, "Are you kidding?"
Yeah.
It's, Ursula Le Guin is just legend, and oh my God, and those stories, they're kind of like they're just the types of stories that I love, the
Yep.
types of I don't even know. I don't even want to give it a speculative fiction. Fine, speculative fiction that I
Mm-hmm.
love. And thematically, they explore all those themes
Mm-hmm.
that I truly enjoy. And yeah, in that introduction, it's so weird because I don't know, like to kind of connect it to Death of the Author. Like Death of the Author is so many things brought together.
Yeah.
Like so many things brought together. And like and this is why I had to in the introduction for that compilation of stories,
Mm-hmm.
like I had to talk about how I even discovered Ursula because the way that I discovered her was like in that way of just something completely, it wasn't from reading her as a speculative fiction author. I
Mm-hmm.
read her nonfiction. It was a piece of nonfiction in a book about motherhood.
Right.
It's a book about where they had creatives writing about motherhood. And it was when I was about to have my daughter, and I was looking for some voices because I was having, lots of people telling me that, when you have kids, you stop writing. You're not going to have time to write. You're not going to want to write. You're going to have mommy brain, all that stuff. And I was panicking, and I found this anthology by all of these artists who are or creatives who were talking about motherhood. And
Mm-hmm.
that was my introduction to Ursula Le Guin. It was reading her there. So it was like, oh, and then after I read her essay, then I went on to, I'm like, who is this woman? And then I went on to
Mm-hmm.
really discover her. So it's like just in this way, I love this idea of all these different types of storytelling, be it fiction or nonfiction,
Mm-hmm.
connecting
Yeah.
in that way. So it's just it for me it all connects.
I also, when I think of Ursula Le Guin, and I read A Wrinkle in Time a long time ago, and that's really sort of my touchstone for her. And then I read the story collection, obviously prepping for this. Whenever I think of her, though, and she was very physically petite, but when I
Yeah.
think of her, she's just had a huge presence and really sort of ferocious and very kind of, well, why don't the rest of you see this? And it's like, well, because you're Ursula Le Guin and the rest of us are kind of just walking behind you in your wake kind of thing.
Yes.
And I love the idea that there's a line between her and Zelu, because I just sort of feel like they're kindred spirits in a way.
Yeah, I would agree. And really quickly,
Yeah.
I think A Wrinkle in Time was Madeline L'Engle.
Oh shoot, you're
And
right. I'm
then you might
sorry.
be thinking of
No,
that Earthsea.
it is Earthsea.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a really embarrassing error for
Oh,
a
it's
bookseller to make, but there you go. Like I said, it's been a minute, but you know what? We're even going to leave that in the show because booksellers are human too. Le Guin, really, the idea that she has this legacy, right, that runs through a genre that for a very long time we thought of as very masculine.
Right. Right.
And for whatever reason, that's what it was. But now I get kind of excited looking at all of the people who are writing sci-fi and fantasy and doing things that, 20 years ago, it was much harder to break into. And now,
Yes.
you've got people doing retellings of The Great Gatsby, only there's Vietnamese paper cutting. And, we've got your whole African futurism, which I want to come back to in a second. But I love the idea that we can pull from so many different places.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's so gosh, it's so different from like only 20 years ago. I mean, I've watched it
Mhm.
change. I watched it change. My first novel was published in 2005, and the climate back then it's like night and day.
Right.
And so like yes, there are a lot of improvements that need to be made and there are a
Hmm.
lot of problems right now, but sometimes we have to like pause for a second and acknowledge the fact that there have been a lot of changes, a lot
Yeah.
of doors have opened. We need more doors opening, but a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
doors have opened and there's so much more available now. There's so many different types of stories that are being told. And it's even in terms of just science fiction,
Hmm.
like science fiction is finally started to open up in a way that it needs to because I don't really understand how it couldn't be open being what it is. Like
Right.
that's really a problem. But yeah, a lot has changed.
But African futurism is a phrase you coined. And
Yes.
I really like it. Afrofuturism is something that I am actually familiar with. But I want to talk about African futurism for a second because there are so many different things that come into play. And it's something that I feel very deeply, even in Death of an Author, which is slightly different from some of the things you've done previously.
Yeah.
But when did you realize you needed to just make the thing that wasn't there?
I kind of realized it in 2018. It's just I was seeing a hole and I was really understanding the power of naming, the power of naming something, back to Ursula Le Guin naming, but
Yeah.
and before, like, I'm not one for categories. I don't like categories. I find
Right.
categories to be confining. They are boxes, and I don't like boxes. I like to be able to breathe and do
Mhm.
whatever I want, you know? But also, I just kind of around that time, I kind of realized the necessity of a word to describe something. When something
Mhm.
doesn't, a lot of times when there's a word to describe something, it becomes clear to people. It exists.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily like that, but that's the reality of it. When something has a name, it exists to people, and like what I was doing didn't have a name. Afrofuturism did not fit what I was doing.
Right.
I did not fit that definition. African futurism is more specifically rooted and directly rooted in African culture, history, mythology, and point of view. That's what I was doing, and so I just understood that. after getting very angry about some things, and then decided to coin a name. And the name that I've coined, African futurism, it's not perfect. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, it's more, I feel like it's more important for me to start a conversation than to have the answers.
Mm.
Answers, yeah, that's the end of the journey. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I needed a conversation to be had to just to, and once you start having that conversation, there's an understanding that, oh, there are some things that don't have a name. There's some things that exist that we're not acknowledging, we can't see, and so in coining the term African futurism, and that's the science fiction aspect of my work,
Yeah.
the fantasy aspect, African Jujuism. So
Right.
coining terms starts the conversation and acknowledges, look, this is something that's over here that I'm doing, and please see it as that. See it as that so that we can, you can kind of broaden your perspective about these things.
I mean, that's why I read. I read so I can, experience something through someone else's POV. I mean, sure, sometimes it's nice to settle into something and be like, oh, I get you completely. But I don't necessarily need to share the same exact cultural background as
Right.
the person I'm reading. I just need to connect with them on an emotional and sort of intellectual level. I mean, I read for voice first, and voice,
Mhm.
oh, wow, voice is a thing you do. And it's
Yes.
so exciting. Can we talk about some of your other literary influences as well? Because you really do pull from everywhere. I mean, you have an MFA,
Mhm.
but
PhD.
and a
2
PhD.
masters and a PhD.
Okay, two masters and a PhD.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much of that is, as you've said in the past, like your parents are both doctors, and like there is an expectation in the community that there are multiple degrees, which I
Yes.
love.
Yes. The PhD was, yeah, you have to get a PhD in my
Okay.
family. Like you
Well, I'm
have to.
delighted you got the PhD because I think your parents are probably pretty fun to hang out with. But wait,
Yeah.
so did the MFA come first and then you did the master's PhD, or you did the master's, the MFA, and the because
No, I don't have an MFA. I
oh, you
have,
don't. I'm sorry.
yeah, I have a master's in journalism, a
Okay.
master's in literature,
Okay.
and then a PhD in literature with an emphasis in creative writing.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'd done 2 masters. I'm like, tired of school. In my family, you have to get a PhD. No matter what you're doing, you have to get a
Okay.
terminal degree.
Okay. So master's in journalism first or master's in
Yeah.
literature first?
Masters in journalism
Okay.
first.
So
Yeah.
story has always been your thing,
Yes.
but then I'm guessing you're pulling from sort of a nonfiction narrative place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, so let's start with the narrative nonfiction for a second, because as you said before, you had the Ursula Le Guin essay on motherhood and creativity, where you're like, I'm going to start
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what might be some other influences in that sort of sphere?
So there's a book. It's another autobiography, and it
Mm-hmm.
has been influential. I will say, like, it's just popped into my head. It has been. It's okay. Fulan Devi.
Okay.
Fulan Devi is called I Fulan, and
Okay.
it was an autobiography of Fulan Devi,
Right.
and this book was exhilarating. They talk about voice.
Okay.
Talk
Okay.
about voice. Just most powerful. She's like the bandit queen. Look up Fulan Devi. I
Uh huh.
can't. You
Okay.
need to know who she is and find that book. And she's book was like, it was highly influential for Who Fears Death. It's like just like in terms of voice and in terms of audacity and nerve. Like this woman, I don't even know how I found the book, but like
Right.
the way that it was written and her sheer forcefulness, unabashed,
Mm-hmm.
just like, this is me, this is my
Okay.
story. So that's definitely one. Another one that I'm thinking about is Woman at Point Zero by
Okay.
Nawal Al-Saidawi.
Okay.
Um, and that's also it's fiction, but it's like she was interviewing she's a doctor and she was interviewing one of her patients,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about this woman who just it's about this, it's very short, and it's this woman's journey, and she's telling her story from jail, another
Okay.
influence in Who Fears Death. So it's like these voices that's why I say I like memoir. I very
Yeah.
much like memoir. But a specific type of memoir. It's typically strong female voice. They can be male or what or
Yeah.
whatever background. But like strong voices that are unapologetic and unafraid to tell you who they are in all their flaws and grandiose, and their messiness as well. Those are my favorite types
Hmm.
of narratives, and those are big influences on my writing of fiction.
Right.
Like everything is connected, honestly.
Yeah, I always come back to voice. I mean, if the voice is there,
Yeah,
I'll follow you anywhere. I mean,
yeah.
I will read anything. I have read stories about places where I was like, huh, didn't realize I was going to read. But if the voice is there, I will, I will chase every single sentence. It's really,
Agreed.
and genre too, I just sort of feel like, well, we can talk about genres or we can just say the story
Yeah.
is, I mean, if you love character, if you love voice, if you want to be surprised, if you want a playful narrative, if you want a little bit of angry poking at systems that are broken. Again, to me, there's so much joy in Death of an Author, which is, I know the title is Death of an Author, but there's so much joy in this book. And
Yeah,
it
I
seems like
mean,
a perfect kind of,
it started with pain,
mhm,
the way that I started writing it,
yeah.
but there are a lot of I laughed a lot when I was writing this. I will
Mm,
say there are moments, there are things that Zelu did.
mm-hmm,
There are things that she did where I was like utterly cracking up
mm-hmm,
at how she did them because I'm like, I can't even believe this woman just went and just looked someone in the face and said that, or
mm-hmm,
like something her family does. There's one in particular, something that her father does that just
mm-hmm,
during a really taut, just really just tense family moment. He does something where I'm just like cracking up. I mean, there were moments where I was definitely laughing really hard, like
mm-hmm,
laughing out loud as and when I think
mm-hmm.
about those moments, I'm like, this is freaking hilarious. This woman and and these robots, really, they're really doing it. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's always been something important to me when I tell stories, even when there's pain, there's joy, and that's honestly, I think that a lot of that comes from my parents
Mm-hmm.
and like the immigrant experience
Mm-hmm.
and this idea that yes, these things are difficult, but you'll always find laughter. You're always going
Mm-hmm.
to be laughing, and I think that's important in stories as a whole.
I think giving readers space to exhale
Yeah, that's it.
is, I mean, why can't we have it all, right? I mean, essentially, that's what we're doing here. We're watching Zelu come of age. We're watching her family come to terms with what her existence in the world looks like.
Mhm.
We're watching the world sort of evolve around her. We're watching social media be social media. There's so many
Mhm. Mhm.
pieces, and yet the joy is always there too. And I think it's really important to be able to do both,
I
right?
agree.
Because if you don't
Yeah.
have a chance to exhale, then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
constant kind of, and that read has a place in the library as well. But
Yeah.
it's just,
Right.
I got all of the things out of
Good.
Death of an Author. I got all of the things.
Yes.
And it's nice to be surprised too. I mean, there's a lot of dog earing and a lot of underlining. The dialogue is super snappy.
Excellent,
And there's a
excellent.
lot of like sort of cinematic set piece kind of thing happening. And there's also a subplot that we're not, what I'm,
Right.
and it was fun. But adaptations, you're working on, you've written Black Panther, you've worked
Mhm,
on some screenplay thing. Doesn't it
mhm.
all come together in a way because essentially it's all storytelling and just the format changes a little bit? Isn't that
Yeah.
kind of how it works?
So I've done, written novels,
Hmm.
novellas, short stories. I've done screenplays. I've co-written pilot episodes. I have adapted other people's work. I've done theater. So I've done all kind, and then there's the nonfiction stuff. So I've
Right.
done all kinds of writing, but yeah, it always comes from the same place,
Right.
and I mean, of course, there are the differing formats. Like screenplay format is very different
Yeah.
from novels. Novels, man, novel is where I live. Okay, screenplays I will visit. I'll go back to novels. There's so much more freedom in writing novels. You can do anything there. You can have a
Right.
whole chapter that's juju if you want it to be.
Yeah.
But the storytelling, the story itself always comes from the same source. So I can because I've done all the different types of writing, and because of that, I've also been able to take from different types of writing and use them in different types of things. I mean, there are things that I learned in screenwriting that I use in Death of the Author. It all comes from the same source, and there's something comforting about that.
The pacing in Death of an Author is like the narrative tension. It's really satisfying.
Good.
That and the dialogue. I mean, and the way the siblings are all kind of like, no. I'm smiling just thinking about all of it. It's really. Have you started working on the next thing? I mean, are you always working on something? It kind of feels like you must be.
Yeah. I am prolific. I've come to, it's only in the last 2 years that I just can admit that I am. I like telling stories. I like writing. I have a lot of energy, and I was an athlete first, so that the athlete never goes away. Just doesn't. But yeah, I'm always working on something. Right now, I am working on. So I have It's funny because the She Who Knows trilogy is the first book, the first novella. So it's a novella trilogy. That first novella came to me when I was in the like 3/4 of the way writing Death of the Author. 3/4. And then this novella pops into which has never happened. I don't do multiple long form things at the same time. It's only one at a time. This is the first time in all of my writing career that has happened. The whole thing, I'm like, oh God. And when I say the whole thing, because I'm a pantser, I don't really know what the whole thing is.
Right.
Oh my God, something's happening. Oh no. And so that was my reaction was, oh no. And so all I could do was just, the athlete in me was like, okay, Nnedi, you gotta do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. And I did it. So I paused, and then I wrote She Who Knows, and then I continued with Death of the Author. So now I had the first book in the She Who Knows trilogy came out in August. The second comes out later in 2025.
Okay.
And I've already finished the third. I mean, I finished that like maybe a month ago. Like I'm still, and there's something about Death of the Author that it's just made me really I'm just bursting with stories. Like I thought it would leave me depleted and tired. I really did. I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna do anything for a little while. I'm just gonna wait. No, that has not, it's been the exact opposite, which has completely shocked me. So yeah, I've got book 2 of She Who Knows is coming out in 2025. And then I also have a graphic novel that's coming out in the summer of 2025 called The Space Cat. So it's great. It's great.
So I'm guessing Space Cat might be for the middle reader set?
I'd say all ages.
Oh, good. Okay, fun.
It's fun. It's like just fun. It's about my cat.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually really I'm not even really a cat person, but that I want to read. That feels like it'll just be bouncy. That seems like the perfect place to end. So I'm going to say thank you, Nnedi. This was so amazing. I am so glad I got to read Death of an Author, and I cannot wait for other readers to get their hands on it. This is a really special book. And you're doing so much here. And I'm not going to stop smiling while I think about this book. So thank you. Death of an Author is out now.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.